Welcome to One Stop News, and thanks for tuning in. I've read all of your comments, all your criticism, and I just want to say thanks, first of all. I think you're going to notice a rapid improvement from here on out. You can probably notice that the camera angle's changed. Hopefully, the audio is better. And I think the biggest change I'm going to make is moving from a format where I kind of just read off a list of news to more of the featured story format I did on Sunday. So instead of just kind of like reading off like the headlines and doing smaller stories and not explaining that much, I'm gonna take 4 to 6 stories each episode, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on how much depth I want to give each, and explaining them in depth, and just pick important issues that I feel like both I and everyone needs to learn more about as they're directly affecting our lives. So the stories I've picked today are taking an in-depth look at the Dodd-Frank rollback and the deregulation, or the proposed deregulation of the financial industry, the resignation of Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, the election of Sinwar in Palestine, more specifically the Gaza Strip, and 2 stories from North Korea. The first is their successful missile test of a medium-range missile, and the assassination of Kim Jong-un's brother, Kim Jong-nam. So let's start with the Dodd-Frank rollback. Now, I'm going to have to use some notes for this one, as financial policy is not a strong suit of mine, and I had to take detailed notes so I make sure I stay on topic and give you just the facts as they are. So Dodd-Frank was signed into law, of course, in 2010, a couple years after the financial reform. It was one of Obama's huge campaign promises to regulate Wall Street and to rein in the excesses. And it has about 350 components of it. Only about 100 or so of those are active now, but even regardless, it is a huge bill. It is wide. It covers a whole lot of areas. Now, obviously, I'm not going to get into every part of it today, but I am going to cover 3 of the things that are some of the main complaints that people have about Dodd-Frank. And so the first of these, and this is probably the least contentious one actually, because there is some bipartisan support to change it. It is the requirements for solvency tests in Dodd-Frank. So the level they set in Dodd-Frank was $50 billion in assets. Now that sounds like a very big number, and it is, but it's not as big for financial institutions as one would think. Now, it was intended for banks like Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, the real big players in the game who can afford it, and who, if they go down, the entire economy has the potential to go down with it. And that's the intention of the bill, to make sure that doesn't happen, to make sure none of the steps that caused the 2008 financial crisis happen again in those banks. And so there's a lot of justification for that. But the problem comes when it's instituted on smaller banks. And so the arguments come in that the capital requirement, or the asset requirement, is too low. So 50 billion is too low because some of the banks that are near the threshold are really struggling to comply with it, and since they have to hire entire new departments to deal with these rules, to deal with the solvency tests, they don't have as much money to invest back into the economy and to start up companies, to help new companies stay afloat, and to really raise the growth rate of the economy and provide new jobs. And so this is where there's bipartisan support, because there's talk of raising it to 150 billion, which would solve a lot of these problems. Because no one's really arguing that banks like Wells Fargo or Goldman Sachs, who have crazy amounts of money and who have the potential to destabilize the economy if they go down, needs to undergo these. So that's where there could be a common ground for reform. Whether it'll happen or not, I don't know, but it's a start. The second is capital requirements for banks. So before Dodd-Frank and before the 2008 financial crisis, banks held about 8 or 9% of their capital in reserve in case of a bad downturn in the market, or just a bad run of investments, what have you. And Dodd-Frank raised these requirements to about 12 or 13% depending on the bank. Now that 4 to 5% increase doesn't sound huge on the surface, but it is, because generally that level of percentage is what banks are willing to risk in startup companies, or a risky investment that may have a high reward because it's a pioneering concept in something. Now, they can't make these investments because all of a sudden they're required to keep more capital so they can pass checks by regulatory industries. And the argument that regulatory industries have, and those who want to see this part kept, are that it makes sure that there isn't a downturn and that there isn't, too much risky investing by banks, because if there's too much risky investing, that 8 or 9% capital stored up isn't enough to make sure that banks are solvent in the case of a crisis, and that's happened in 2008. So it seems like the best ideas for this is not necessarily to completely do away with it, but to make it more flexible. And so the third complaint a lot of people in the finance industry have is one that many people aren't going to have a huge amount of sympathy for, and that's that the rate they're taxed on their investments is too high. Previously, before Obama, it was about the mid-10s, just depending on the amount. Obama and under Don Frank, it went up to 23.8%, which was about a 10% increase, and that is pretty big. That's a big tax increase on anyone. Now, the Trump administration policy on this is actually really interesting, and it's one that you probably wouldn't expect. So, what Trump has actually proposed to do is to bring up the returns on these investments, the tax on these, to the top tax bracket. Now, in conjunction with his tax cuts, though, this would only raise it to about 25%, because Trump's proposed tax rates are no tax rates for low income and somewhere between 10 to 25 depending on your level of income. So it would actually raise them by about 1%, but everyone else is getting a tax cut. So this is great for the short-term economy. I mean, people have more money to spend, they're willing to spend it more, there's more money in the nation for investing in startup companies, for investing in the stock market. So there's certainly a lot of potential for a big short-term boost. However, the problem comes with the federal deficit. So unless there's a big restructuring of the government, which it seems like Trump is also planning on doing, you're going to be running huge federal deficits, and even with the restructuring, there may still be a huge deficit, even if the best case scenario of 6 or 7% economic growth does happen. So that's the concern of a lot of people, that these tax cuts, while they'd be great for consumers, great for the middle class, they would not be good for the deficit, and they would not be good for whoever follows Trump, because they could likely set off another financial crisis if they aren't done in the right way. Now, there's actually one extra thing as well that isn't in Dodd-Frank, but is really important. So there's something called the fiduciary rule that was instituted under Obama that mainly protects retired people and people close to retirement, as it made the rule that all investors who are in control of retirements or savings account must always act in their client's best interest. Now, consumer groups love this, people on the left love this, and Republicans do too in a way. Now, some don't. I mean, and Wall Street doesn't like this either, because it limits their investments to safer options, and the returns aren't as good for the investor or for the fund in general. But generally, if you're investing in a savings fund or a retirement fund, you don't want risky investments. You want a steady increase in return. So they actually want to remove the fiduciary role, and there's movements from the Trump administration that this would happen. Now, consumer groups are very worried about this, and so are many on the left. And this is likely the most dangerous part of it. All the other parts could be very good, actually. There's a lot of complaints about Dodd-Frank that there's way too much red tape in it, way too many regulations, and there is a lot of credence in that. But the fiduciary rule is actually, at least in my opinion and from what I've read, a very good rule. It protects consumers, and it protects some of the most vulnerable people from losing all their money in a dangerous investment. The second story of today is the resignation of Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. He was one of Trump's key advisors and was seen as one of the more hardline members of Trump's cabinet. Now, this comes for two reasons. The first is not the main one, but it is important to mention. So he was in contact with the Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak, and there are reports that he was discussing sanctions with him, which, if he was, that is against the law. Now, that law is rarely enforced, and the law specifically is that U.S. citizens are not allowed to conduct foreign diplomacy. What got him fired, or led him to resign, depending on how you look at it, was that he misled Vice President Mike Pence over these conversations. Apparently, the Department of Justice had warned the White House about the reports of these talks, and there were concerns that he had done this, and he misled Mike Pence about them, which had got him fired. And this is kind of seen as a power struggle in the Trump administration, because Mike Pence is seen as one of Trump's key men, as was Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. And it's not particularly surprising that Lieutenant General Michael Flynn would overstep his bounds, considering that is what is rumored to have gotten him fired from the Defense Intelligence Agency back a couple years ago under the Obama administration. Now, Trump has a few options here. It's going to be interesting what he does, because he can replace Lieutenant General Michael Flynn with an advisor that's more moderate, more center-right, closer to the Republican mainstream, and this could signal that he's willing to cooperate more with Congress and to rein in his more extreme policies. Now, if he goes with another hardliner, that's a clear indication that he's going to continue going forward. Now, Trump doesn't really have to do either. He's still got the support of many of his backers, and his approval ratings are roughly where they were during the campaign trail. So he's not really beholden to take a moderate on or to take a hardliner on. He can really do what he wants in this case. But it'll be interesting to see where he goes, because this could be an indicator of where he's shifting towards for his presidency. The third and fourth story of today are both coming out of North Korea, and they're the successful missile test that Pyongyang conducted, as well as the assassination of Kim Jong-un's brother, Kim Jong-nam. Now, the first is the missile test, and this has been particularly concerning for two reasons. The first is it's a successful missile test, and the second is that it is a solid fuel rocket rather than a liquid fuel rocket. Now, the difference in a liquid fuel rocket and a solid fuel rocket is that a solid fuel rocket has the potential to be transported, moved, and fired within minutes, because it's preloaded with fuel and can just go. Now, this has concerned a lot in the Pentagon and a lot in South Korea, China, and the UN, as now North Korea technically has the potential to launch a nuclear missile at a moment's notice. This is obviously problematic, because a liquid fuel missile takes hours to fuel, and there is a big likelihood that it'd be seen by a satellite and could be knocked out by a preemptive strike. Now North Korea has the potential to launch a missile strike on a moment's notice, and it's dangerous. There have been a few reports that this may be a test to Trump, but honestly, I think it's more important that we need to respond to the fact that North Korea may have a missile that could hit Japan or South Korea on a moment's notice. Now, the assassination of Kim Jong-nam is a little different, and it's different in a way that I think is important to talk about, because Kim Jong-nam is not really a direct threat to Kim Jong-un. He's been out of the country for over a decade now, has been estranged from the ruling class and from Kim Jong-un for years, and it doesn't look like he has many plans to run North Korea. He was always kind of a playboy in a way. So what this kind of indicates is that Kim Jong-un's hold on the government may not be that strong. He may be on the rocks, and there have been reports, granted, it's hard to really say anything with substance about the North Korean government because of how secretive they are, but if he was worried that Kim Jong-nam could be installed in a coup, either by China or by generals disloyal to him, that could be one of the main reasons, and I think that's the most likely reason, that he ordered the assassination of his half-brother. And this indicates that the regime could be on the way out. Now, I do not want to make any predictions of that way because we don't know, and North Korea is probably the biggest mystery of any country in the world right now, besides maybe Eritrea. The final news story of today is the election of Yahya Sinwar in Gaza. He's been elected as the leader of the Gaza Strip by Hamas, and he's one of the most hardline members of the group that is in the public sphere. He was arrested in 1988 for the murder and kidnapping of 2 Israeli soldiers, and he was released in 2011 in a prisoner swap deal. He is known as being a militant figure in the group and has often served as a gap between the militant side and the political side. And you have to keep in mind that he's a hardliner in a group that has vowed to destroy Israel. So he's certainly very worrisome for Prime Minister Netanyahu, those in the Israeli security forces, and Michael, who is a spokesman, that's his last name, for the Israeli military, is extremely worried that this could spark a new war between Israel and Palestine. And it's possible, without a doubt. Um, this move by Hamas in a secret election to put a hardline militant leader in charge of the Gaza Strip is likely a clear response to Israel, who have been expanding settlements in the West Bank and have stepped up their campaign against the tunnel system and Hamas elements in Gaza. Now, this is really problematic for a lot of reasons. I know I keep saying that word, but it's the best word I can think of for this situation. A war between Palestine and Israel at this time right now could just further destabilize the Middle East, and with President Trump's commitment to Prime Minister Netanyahu, this could have a lot of potential ramifications for the U.S. in the Middle East and at home. So we'll have to see what Sinawar ends up doing. He has promised to focus more on Gaza and improving the lives of people living in the Gaza Strip, but I'm hesitant to believe him on that. So that's it for today. Sorry to end on such a dire note, but thanks for watching. I hope you continue to tune in. I hope you like the changes I made, and I hope you like the format change. I think it'll be more interesting and just better in general. So I hope to see you next time.